Today we're going to be talking about the Qidi Max4, and man, the thing has been awesome. I have been printing with this machine for several months now. I had early access to the machine, and it's been at my office as our daily driver there this entire time. We actually just crossed over 500 hours on the machine of testing, so that's about the experience that I have so far. Now, in today's video, I want to go over some of my experiences. I'm going to talk about the cons and the pros, but I want to break up the video into 3 different sections. I want to talk about my experience with the machine itself, I want to talk about the Qidi Box, and then I want to talk about the Polar Cooler, because I think they all need their own little discussions, because they paint the picture, the overall picture of the machine slightly differently when you add each one of those, and I'll talk about what my thoughts are on those. But if you guys want a TLDR, I absolutely love and recommend the machine itself. It is an absolute behemoth, 390 by 390, plus the heating, plus how hot the actual hot end gets is incredible. It's kind of nuts, actually. Then the box itself could need some work, even if it's not the box physically. After the update, it's the software that's controlling the box. It's the slicer itself, so on and so forth. I'll get into that later. And the Polar Cooler is an amazing innovation that I think other people, other companies are gonna be trying to copy from Qidi, because I think it's an absolutely fantastic add-on to 3D printing. But the implementation almost feels like a beta and not so much a V1 or V2, etc. etc. I think it would be really improved on. So that's the TLDR if you guys just want that. Otherwise, there's going to be chapters right below down here. You can even just hover over the timeline on YouTube and it'll take you to different sections. All right, with that said, let's get right into it. Let's talk about the cons of the Max 4. Let's go. All right, guys, I have 6 pages of notes here. No, not all of them are cons. There's definitely a lot of pros here, but I want to make sure that I cover as much as I can. I did do a lot of printing and a lot of testing, even more so than most other machines with this one, because every time that I thought I had an idea for how the machine is, they've updated something and it has either changed something or has improved the feature that I was specifically focusing on. So it took some time to get this thing right. And actually, I really like doing that type of thing instead of rushing into an actual proper review, because it gives me a chance to properly give my feedback and test the machine thoroughly. So definitely fantastic there. But let's go on to the cons like promised. I want to start by actually giving 2 words of caution, okay, about this machine. One is, if you're interested in the Max 4, definitely be aware of the amount of space that the machine takes up. It's lots of space. You need room on the back of the machine for waste management. You need space on top of the machine for multi-material if you go for the Qidi Box. You need space on the side for the Polar Cooler, and the space on the other side for the power plug and power cable. So you need some space for this. It is not just a large machine. It is a very large machine, among one of the best that you can buy right now, at least with these features. And in fact, I don't even have a place here at the studio that I could put it, because I already have a very large machine on the floor here, and I don't really want the Max 4 sitting on the floor. It kind of belongs a little bit higher, so it's at the office. So definitely think about the space, look at the specs on the site, make sure that you look at the overall dimensions, and make sure that you can fit this into your space, because it's just very large. The other part of that, another word of caution there, is the weight, and I have lots of weight. Don't try to move it using the lower handles, which are often very nice, but picking the machine up with the lower handles, it still has a very balanced weight, and when you pick it up by the middle, it tends to kind of want to go the opposite direction. So I would highly suggest you carry it with somebody else. But if you are going to do it alone, going to move it alone like I have a couple times, you're better off just bear hugging the machine, kind of giving it a big hug in the corners there and trying to lift it that way. That seems to be the best bet. It's definitely not a machine that was designed to be carried around or be mobile. This is something that you put down and that's it. In fact, the machine is so large and so heavy that we used it to print little spacers for the bottom underneath our desk, because the desk was bowing a little bit. So just keep that in mind. Weight and the space that's required for the machine are both large. All right, cool. All right, let's move into the cons. Now, this is a funny con, because this is something that we've also asked for, and it's kind of biting us in our own butt. The PEI on this machine, at least my example, has been the stickiest PI I have ever used. And what I mean by that is sometimes the prints just almost fuse themselves to this build plate. And I gotta say, now after about 500 hours and a mild, I guess, lathering of glue, it has chilled a little bit. Now we can just pop off some prints, but in the very beginning, just keep that in mind that the PI was crazy sticky, and I would probably suggest you lowering the temperatures on it a bit, kind of like those cool plates, so that you don't end up either ruining, well, your precious prints or the PI itself, as we've experienced, just because of the crazy stickiness of the build plate. Like I said, it's kind of weird to put it in the cons section because this is something that we've asked for, but hey, too much of a good thing can also be bad, I guess, right? Just a word of caution. Then I have here that the closed loop motors don't seem to go back to where they need to, and this is literally why companies use closed loop motors, is to be able to come back exactly to where you were previously after sitting for a while, whether it was a pause or a filament change or whatever it might be. And sometimes this results in layer skip messes. Maybe they're not being used. I'm not exactly sure about how the software and that hardware connect to each other, but long pauses, in my example or my experience, skip. I have an example right over here where the machine sat idle overnight during a filament runout situation. New filament was put in, and when it went back to printing, it did not go to the exact same spot. And this is one of those prints where I wanted it to be as perfect as possible, so I stopped it early on and had to redo the whole print, ruining this print right there. But I just wanted to mention that it was off by maybe just a millimeter or two, but still, if they're closed loop motors, there should be no reason for it. And I have heard other people and other reviewers also question how they're using the closed loop motors. Is there something for it? I don't know. Maybe there's just a weird utilization of them through Clipper. I'm not sure, but definitely wanted to raise awareness about it, that I've had that issue with this machine. Then I have the UI is trying too hard to work and look like others, and it has wasteful messages that don't help or even change. This is kind of a funny one because it's non-critical, but the UI does look very familiar. I guess you could say that might be a good thing, but there is a message on the machine that literally says that the machine is perfect. And before one of the firmware updates, which I do want to talk about firmware updates in a little bit here, one of the firmware updates made the machine crash when sitting at idle on the Clipper side. We were just getting some errors, some disconnection errors. And what was crazy was I couldn't use the machine, but the UI kept saying that this machine's in perfect working order. So just, at least have those messages kind of change or be useful. I think that would greatly help the first glance, part of the machine. Like, even if there is a fault, at least have it say what the fault is so that everyone involved knows what to do next. Kind of like the messages changing on some of the other machines that have those little cute UI messages. Then I have here the hot end design can use an update actually that the transition between the heat break and the cool zone needs to be smoother. And the reason for that is when you're actually putting in the nozzle on these hot ends on these machines and the other Qidi machines actually, because they all use the same hot end, there's a transition between the cold side and the hot side where it might not be absolutely perfectly aligned. So when you're putting in the nozzle, you can get it a part of the way there, and then you can no longer do it by hand. You need some kind of key or tool rather to screw it in, and what that's doing is it's ever so gently bending that upper portion of the integrated nozzle there, and it has a ceramic piece in the middle, and they tend to crack. I've had this happen on the Q2, and I know that it's just a matter of time before it could happen on these machines. I do think these hot ends legitimately need a review or at least some kind of modification so that there's better alignment between the two pieces of the hot end. Now, I gotta say, I have 3 Qidi machines right now that have this hot end. One of them had one of them crack. The other 2 machines that I use all the time have not had this issue. But like I said, when I'm doing this kind of testing and something like that happens or I notice something, I'm gonna write it down, and that's why it's on this list. All right, with that said, I believe we went through the cons, which technically aren't that bad. Maybe we can call these things some growing pains, and let's go right into the pros. All right. Today's video is sponsored by PCBWay. They're an amazing resource for anything 3D printed, injection molded, CNC machining. The list goes on and on and on. Check out PCBWay.com for an amazing and extensive list of resources and services that they provide, and also a community tab where you can check out other projects by other makers, and you can purchase the projects and everything that you need for them right there. Not just PCBs. The list goes on and on with everything they do, and I guarantee you, just like I was surprised, you will be surprised by how reasonable the pricing is. So check out PCBWay, and thank you, PCBWay, for sponsoring this video. So for the pros, all right, and this is going to be an important section because these pros are why I'm constantly recommending this machine to those who want its features, right? Number one, massive build area. 390 by 390 by 340. It's amongst the largest consumer 3D printers that you can get right now. You're just getting so much build area, and the look of it just looks stunning. Everyone that walks into our office that sees the machine ends up asking some kind of questions about it because it's polarizing in its size. Two, the hot end reaches 370. The bed reaches 120, and the chamber reaches 65 degrees. Now, I've tested this to about 340 degrees. I've not gone hotter than that. I printed PPS CF on the machine, and it did fantastic. The chamber does take a little while to heat, but that's because it is a massive chamber. Just make sure you get your bed hot as well, and it'll help the chamber get even hotter. 370, 120, 65. Those are unicorn numbers at this point, something that we're all going for. It would have been nice to see 400, but that's just asking for a lot at this point for a consumer grade machine. It is not an oven, it's a 3D printer, and obviously as materials get better and better, we're going to be more demanding with it. But I gotta say, the hot end reaching 370, bed 120, and that 65 on the heated chamber is awesome. It's something that I'm constantly looking for, striving for, and also recommending because people want it to print engineering grade materials, and this thing knocks those out of the park completely. 3, it has both HEPA and carbon filters built in. I know a lot of machines have that. I always advocate for this, and I can't wait for the time when manufacturers start putting external filtrations on these things, because they need to be a little bit more robust than what printer manufacturers are putting in, because the ones that they are putting in tend to be rather small, and those are going to be ineffective after just short uses, and you're going to have to be swapping those out a lot to be more effective, but external ones are going to be better. Now, it's definitely a pro that we have both HEPA and carbon filters already installed and working on the machine. That's obviously fantastic. It means that they care about us and what we're printing on these machines by putting them in there. So kudos, Qidi, for that. 4, this is running a customized version of Clipper that we have full access to, including the fluid interface and camera. You can SSH into the machine, which is fantastic. That means that when you buy this as a tool, you have the power to alter the tool because it is yours. It is not somebody else's. You're not just leasing this thing. You have the control if you want it. You don't have to use it. You can use Qidi stuff. You can use the UI on the display. You don't have to ever get into Fluid if you don't want to, or in Clipper if you don't want to. But in case you do and you want to make some adjustments, you want to make your own macro, you want to make the machine do something, some calibration manually, you can totally do that through Clipper, and that's absolutely awesome. Open source is definitely the way to go. Thank you, Qidi, for sticking with that, and I command you to be even more open source with your software and firmware. I think it will only help you because of the type of people that are buying Qidi machines are mostly interested in the engineering aspect of the machines, and those are the same type of people that just want more open source from you guys, especially with the Qidi Box, for example. I know some files have been omitted, that type of thing. We want it all. Give us the files. I think it will only be a massive benefit to you because most of the customers don't really mind or care, but the ones that do, it's important for them to have that access, and I think, like I said, it'll just benefit everybody involved. Thanks, Qidi. 5, uses its own version of Orca Slicer and can use regular Orca Slicer. So you're not tied down to anything there. You can just take the IP address of the machine, put it in any slicer that you enjoy, and use it. I do got to say that the
Qidi Studio
works really well. It has really great profiles. I've very rarely altered the profiles from the standard, except if I wanted something very specific with a file. and that it has worked perfectly fine. I definitely don't have any more gripes other than, otherwise, if you're using a bunch of different machines and you want to just use Orca Slicer because it's easy to have one, you can do that. If you just have one or two machines, just use
Qidi Studio,
and you should be good to go. 6, a recipe for printing almost any filament out there. And I mentioned this before because of the 370, 120, 65. You can do engineering grade, you can do PLA thanks to the coolers, you can even do it with all the doors closed reliably, which is just fantastic. You could print TPU. I printed some PIBA. Pretty much every single thing that I've thrown at this machine has printed out nearly flawlessly. Every time I print something, especially something that has like a texture on it, I take it out of the machine and we just sit there in awe. It's like, it's crazy where we've come from our original Ender 3, which is where my first machine was. It was at the office. It's just an absolute beast. That's the best way to say it. And 7, no issues with internal hardware like some of the previous releases. I have tutorials on my channel fixing some of the internals on other machines. This one, the hardware seems to be pretty good, and they have different safety regulations now because of the things that have happened in the past, and I've had no issues. I know somebody else that I recommend this machine to at a CNC style shop, and they use it for work, and I haven't heard any bad things about it from there either. So far I think people are enjoying the machine, and I do gotta say, make sure that you're on the most recent firmware, because they've had a lot of firmware updates, little things here and there, but some of them have been major, and the latest firmware right now has kept our machine running absolutely flawlessly for weeks. So definitely jump on the latest firmware if you didn't already update the machine. Even if you just got it out of the box recently, I would definitely suggest you making sure you're on that latest firmware from Qidi Tech. All right, next up, the Qidi Box. Let's go. All right, the cons of the Qidi Box. So the Qidi Box, just in general, has kind of been maybe a hit and a miss for Qidi Tech, and I have a feeling they know it already, right? So the first Qidi Box that was out on one of the previous machines just wasn't cutting it. There were so many issues with it. They ended up redoing the hardware and firmware on the Qidi Box, releasing 2, which on the Q2 began performing significantly better. In that review, I still recommended that you wouldn't just rely on it for a asinine amount of filament changes. However, mild changes, small color prints, if you need to jump over a spool from one that's almost ending, if you need to swap a few colors, it excels there. But the reliability of it has been not the best. And I gotta say, my experience with the machine, even though I love it, has been fantastic. But every time we've tried to do some multicolor, we've run into some kind of issue. I'll go over it as we go. But let's start with the cons. Number 1, super loud, and I have it in caps. When this thing starts to collect filament, or even when it runs, it sounds like a pirate ship or a wooden barrel rolling down a hill. That's literally what I wrote down. It is a very loud unit. Basically, since there's 2 steppers, one is rolling the actual spool and one is pulling on the filament itself. In order to stop them from not rolling at the same speed and doing some kind of pulling or pushing to keep the filament taut, it has this mechanism that clicks. So it literally just sounds like chains being pulled through something wooden or something like that. It's a loud thing when you hear it. It's not the most pleasant, and if you have people around, or you're in an office environment, or even if you're sitting next to the machine and you're working, it's definitely a very loud, probably the loudest filament management unit that I have here at the shop or at the office. So just keep that in mind. It's not for a place that requires a quiet machine. 2 is does not officially support cardboard spools, and I've had a mixed bag. I've specifically put cardboard spools into the Qidi Box, and man, sometimes they work fine, especially when they're brand new, and then when they get a little bit lower, it just can't handle it. It's not meant for them. It starts to skip. I've printed adapters, and they still don't work properly. It also doesn't work that well with light spools, or when a spool is almost empty. It starts to do the same type of skipping. It's almost like we need to put some kind of weight into the center of the spool to keep it kind of set in the rollers for it to not do the skipping thing that it does. So you know, you can put cardboard spools in there, but definitely try to stay away. And what I've done is when I did get a cardboard spool, I just respooled it on something like a Bambu Lab spool or a Creality spool or a Sunlu spool, something along those lines, just to throw it in there without further hassle. But yeah, cardboard spools not officially supported. 4 is that it needs external power for its heating, and that means that you have a second power cable. I'll touch more about this later, but just keep that in mind. If you're going to get the combo, you already need to designate 2 separate power cables for your setup so that you can run the heating elements on the Qidi Box. 5, it requires up to a 2.5 millimeter purge setting in the slicer to swap colors, which is up to 5 times more than standard or other machines that claim that they don't waste filament as much. And I can prove that to you with this pile over here. This was a print that I kind of fixated on. I've been printing a lot of these Sorpix designs in a much larger scale than they're supposed to. It's almost like 250, 260% scale, something like that. And the cool thing about this machine, the incredible part, is that I was able to print all of this. I mean, all the parts to this. An entire 390 by 390 build plate full of parts in one go. And there's no other machine, or I can't say that, there is not a lot of machines that can do that. Obviously you can print this in parts, but to print it all at once is just an incredible feat. And what ends up happening is the purge on this material, it's because of the way that the extruder and the hot end and the filament path there is designed. It requires a huge amount of purging, up to 5 times. I measured up to 5 times more than a normal machine on the same print. So you got to keep that in mind. And one of the problems I had, which is why you see all this failed prints here and all these towers, was if you don't have that enough, especially on white filament, and this right here is a proof of that, they will bleed. The color bleeds into itself, and not just for a little while, the entire time. It's a very strange thing that was happening. It took forever to figure out what was going on. Lots of back and forth with Qidi and just kind of figuring it out. And this right here is the example why. So if you look where the door is, there's one gray line right between the wheels, and that is the black part underneath the grill being printed and bleeding into the white. And it was doing that to an extreme degree. If I get this lower one here, it was doing it everywhere. It was doing it with yellow, it was doing it with red, it was doing it with just every color on every print that was multicolor. It was just bleeding everything together. And then we found out that in the slicer, it was just set to 0.5, which is what most other machines have it set to standard. And like I said, the only way that I was able to get it to print white without bleeding through was 2.5. And it makes really, really large purges. But at that point, you can have a perfect print like they promise. So, not the most efficient multi-material printing out there, but totally capable of doing it. This was all, like I said, printed. The body of this machine is all one piece, and there is a ton of filament changes on this huge print. So just keep that in mind. Totally possible. It works. But there's some caveats there. It's not absolutely perfectly optimized like some other machines, and I think that if you're buying this machine for your engineering grade prints, I think you're not going to need this as much as some people are that are just going to be printing Flexi Dragons. Do you get what I'm saying there? And I also noticed that through one of the updates, you can no longer dry without removing the other spools so that they can spin while drying, kind of like the AMS2 Pro does from Bambu Lab. So because when I first got the machine, I was able to dry while printing and all that fun stuff, but I believe that has been removed. That's something that I personally need to do more research on. Maybe there's a setting in there somewhere that I can turn that off and just have it dry the filament without pulling the PTFE tubes out. I'm not sure, but it's something that I quickly noticed and added on last minute here to my cons list of the Qidi Box. All right, let's talk about the pros. There isn't that many, but let's talk about them. It has individual PTFE channels, which means that there's less filament to pull back, and support for abrasives, because most other units take the 4 channels and they push them into one right at the actual unit, and then one PTFE tubes goes to the machine. This has 4 individual PTFE tubes going almost all the way to the machine, which means you're going to be able to print or have more success, at least, with abrasives with this box, which is a pretty big deal. It also opens up the door to using the Qidi Box, maybe when they fully release the open source files there, hopefully. It will also allow you to use the Qidi Box for multi-tool head machines. For example, I just recently did a video on how to add the Anycubic Ace Pro to your Snapmaker U1, so that each channel inside of the Ace just goes to a tool head, and then you can have an enclosed and heated box, and it manages, you know, each filament for your each individual tool head, which is really nice and a huge perk. So I wonder if we can get that going with the Qidi Box and make the Qidi Box more useful for everyone else, and also including their own machines in the near future. And then the other pro too is you can heat it to 65, which is hotter than some dryers go, and that's a fantastic feature, especially because you don't have to swap your spools all over the place, and you can store them in there and dry. It is a great feature to be able to dry inside of your filament management unit. All right, so that is what I think of the Qidi Box. Like I said, if you bought the combo, it's fine. You can work with it. You can print all kinds of incredible things. Just don't expect it to be the top performer. I would rate it, let's say if it was 5 stars, I would give it like a 3.5. All right, that's the Qidi Box. All right, let's move on to the final feature of this thing, which I think could be huge technically, the polar cooler. Man, the polar cooler, I actually think that companies, like I mentioned before, I think companies are going to be copying this thing and optimizing Qidi's idea on what this thing did and does. And maybe Qidi Tech will actually do it first and just keep iterating on this thing and make a Polar Cooler 2 that's just unbelievable. But let's talk about why I think that. The Polar Cooler, what is it? It's essentially a pump that sits on the side, kind of like what they have for laser cutters to cool the actual point where the laser touches, so to kind of push the smoke away. I think they call it air assist on those machines. It's essentially one of those pumps, but they use it to cool the extruder. And the point of that is, if you're printing PLA on a long print, you can actually close all the doors and get the chamber nice and warm for better layer adhesion. But usually when you do that on a machine, the hot ends get so hot they tend to overheat and the filament gets soft where it shouldn't be and you get clogs. This is supposed to prevent that by pushing cool air directly onto the gearing. I think it's a great solution. I think this should be looked at by other manufacturers to be incorporated into their machines because, well, I think it's just a really great feature, especially if you're printing something really technical and you don't want your extruder overheating for any reason. And that's kind of the picture they're painting with this machine, is they're going for the people that are printing large prints with technical filaments. And that's why I think the Polar Cooler can be something really cool. All right, so number one, there is a hose in the back. There is a plug on the top. There is a cable on the side, and there's a fan at the front. All sides of the Polar Cooler have something on them. So it's actually pretty difficult to place somewhere next or on or by the machine because you can't quite tell how it's supposed to sit because there's hoses and plugs and fans all around it. Just kind of interesting and makes it feel like this thing, even though it's a really amazing idea, kind of makes it feel like it's an afterthought, even though it might have not been. All right, number two is that, well, the Polar Cooler needs external power, which is a third power plug. So once again, keep that in mind if you're buying the combo and if you're also buying the Polar Cooler, keep in mind that you are going to need 3 plugs, 3 sockets for this machine. So it's not just a one and go, and maybe this is one of those things where maybe there can be a cable that has 3 heads that Qidi could include later on, I don't know, in different models or whatever, but definitely something to think about. I wish they could kind of pull power from themselves and just have one power plug. That could have been cool as well. Maybe like a built-in splitter, power splitter on the back where you can plug in all your accessories in it and it still just pulls power from the single plug. I'm not an electrician. I don't know how that would work. All I know is that when you're buying this as a full kit, you need 3 plugs, and that's something that you need to know. 3 is it's louder than the whole machine, and the sound is fan noise. When this thing kicks in, it's loud. This isn't the machine that you're going to want to sit next to you in your office while you're working. I mentioned that with the Qidi Box being loud, and this is a whole different type of loud. This is a constant loud, because when this thing when the print starts going, the thing turns on and it doesn't turn off until the print is done, so it's just a consistent noise, whereas the Qidi Box has occasional noise when it needs to spin the filament. So just keep that in mind. It's definitely a loud pump with a loud fan noise. 4, missed opportunity to use it as an air assist like on laser engravers for parts cooling as well. So what I mean by this is right now the air hose just goes to this kind of tubing on the extruder, and that blows the air right into the extruder, but they could have easily had that tube route just a little bit lower just to get more air, more cold air from outside of the chamber onto the cold part of the hot end. And I think that right there is the next step. That's version 2. Clean up the actual packaging and make the air assist, give it even more air, give the hot end air as well. So not just the extruder, but also the cold side of the hot end. There's definitely enough air coming out of this very powerful pump. Maybe this is something that can be even 3D printed, something that we can just have the files off of and install on our machines. I have a feeling that it would make a big difference in long, hot prints, and it would completely cancel out heat creep for some filaments like PLA and TPU even. I think it could potentially be huge and definitely something worth testing. I just wanted to note this for everyone involved. And then 5, I have the hose rubs on the top of the glass. What's interesting is their solution for the hose rubbing on the glass was to add a Velcro strap to the top of the hose, and to be fair, it completely functions and works. I put it exactly where they did it in their video. And yeah, the hose does not rub anymore. It literally, the Velcro part that rubs the glass now, and that's fine because there's way less friction there. There's also a way to route the tube in the very beginning that doesn't seem like something that you would do, but if you follow the directions, you have to go into the first part of the cable chain, and that also solves a lot of kinking and pulling issues that I initially had with the hose. So follow the instructions on how they give it to you and how they tell you to install it, and it actually functions exactly how it should. Just, you know, kind of like I said, it makes it feel like more of like an afterthought, where actually I think it's an absolutely brilliant feature that pushes 3D printing forward. So the pros of the Polar Cooler is it does what it's supposed to do. I think it's an amazing idea. Lets you keep the machine closed even when printing PLA and TPU, and it has potential to grow into something a little bit more, and I think that's pretty awesome. All right, that's actually all the 3 major sections that I had written down in my notes. That was a good old 6 pages of written notes there for you guys. So let's close this thing, and I'll see you here in just a second for the conclusion. Let's go. All right, so just to wrap up, I know I've already said this. I really like the machine and the Polar Cooler together. I think they're a phenomenal combo there for you to be able to print almost every single possible filament that you can purchase. Obviously, you're not going to do PEEK and PEC and things like that, but everything all the way up to PPSCF, this thing just absolutely crushes. It does fantastic. If you do end up getting the combo with a Qidi Box, there's just some things for you to look out for, like I mentioned, but you can totally use it, and it'll be great for those long prints where you need a couple spools or you want to finish up some other spools, that kind of stuff. It definitely does fantastic. If you're going to be focusing on hotter filaments as well. You can use it to dry your filaments. It's just solid. It's definitely a solid package, but even better machine. So it is definitely something I'm going to be recommending if you're more on the engineering type, or you want just the largest machine that you can get in your studio to print big projects. This is definitely going to be the one. Guys, there's going to be links down in the description. I would highly appreciate it if you guys use them. They are affiliate links and they greatly help the channel out. I also have a few new shirt designs on 3dprintsos.com, so definitely check out the merch there. Guys, huge thank you to our Patreon members and our YouTube members. You guys are keeping me afloat and I really, really appreciate that. And as always, I'll see you guys in the comments. Later.